Welcome to this presentation on the adaptation of BIM and ICMS in the public sector contracts. We're going to focus on building information management and ICMS, International Construction Measurement Standards. First, I think I should introduce myself, I suppose, so you know who you're listening to. My name is Ross Griffin, and I'm the founder of KOSMOS. We are a specialist digital cost and carbon quantity surveying consultancy. We have offices in Copenhagen, Dublin, and Limerick. I'm also the founder of the Fifth Dimension, which is a cloud-based solution, a SaaS system that records, reports, and analyzes cost and carbon information. But let's just jump into our presentation here. And on the agenda really are these three main discussion points: the impact of ICMS on global construction practices. We're going to look a little bit of what ICMS is. For some of you will already know this, of course. For others, this will be new. So we won't get too technical about it. We can take that after in the questions and answers if necessary, or after this presentation for sure. You can contact me. But the role of BIM in the public sector construction projects, building information management or building information modeling, depending on the terminology you use, has been around for a long time. But we now have a mandated requirement on our public projects. And what does that mean for us? And then the challenges and opportunities in implementing ICMS and BIM standards. We talk a little bit about that, the challenges that we have seen when it comes to ICMS and BIM. And to give you a little bit of a context here, we've been using in KOSMOS ICMS for about 5-6 years. Albeit it has been around since 2015, 2016, we kind of introduced it as our way of working. So we have a bit of experience working with ICMS on our global projects. And we've been working with BIM projects for about a decade now. All our projects are BIM. We have a lot of experience in that kind of collaborative approach. And we talk a lot about that in this presentation in relation to BIM, how it's changing how we communicate with the other stakeholder groups, etc. But I think, just to start off here, the purpose and the reasoning behind the introduction of BIM and ICMS is that we are, as you all know, transitioning into this really digitized way of working. You can see it in our private lives, how our phone has become, this device that goes with us everywhere. It has everything in it. We've access to the cloud information from anywhere at any time. The same principles now are beginning to start within construction. Building information management is that digitization of information. It's not just a 3D, and we talk a bit about that. It's also everything we create in terms of communication between stakeholder groups, clients, upstream, downstream, how we procure, how we build, how we take decisions, etc. So in order for us to go through the process here, of digitization and get the real value from it, we have to be able to standardize. And these three categories here are evolution. Digitization, we're working within Excel and Microsoft Word and PowerPoint, email, etc. The digitization of information and communication. But the digitalization is leveraging that digital information to improve business competitiveness. And this is what building information management and building information modeling and ICMS will do on our public works for our public sector and controlling the investments we have in our works in the future. And from there, we'll be able to transform our industry. So this is hugely important for our industry here in Ireland and hugely important for our public works projects. If we look at our industry, and again, the reasoning behind this transition is, if we look at our industry in construction and compare it to other industries, we can see that construction we're still in a very archaic process. It's very manual. It's very piecemeal. We're building, multi-unit residential in the same way as we build our extensions at home. How we communicate is very disconnected. If you look at the image here on the screen, compare it to manufacturing, or the financial services, which is very connected when it comes to digital information, digital workflow. So we've an awful lot to do here, but the good thing about this is that little steps will have such huge impacts, and this is what the government requirements are around BIM and ICMS. They're going to have huge impacts on our projects going forward. So the Capital Works Management Framework, just to have a quick look at that, to kind of formulate what are we actually talking about here. The core BIM requirements are starting off with ISO 19650. This is the guidelines for digital information. I just have a note here. ISO 19650 does not define the standards with which to use within a process. But lucky for us, government have defined some of the standards that we should use, like Uniclass 2015. Uniclass is a classification system to identify components within the 3D model or digital asset. Wonderful, we now have that. This is what the architects and engineers will be using to identify walls, doors, etc. It'll also be used by the facilities managers and asset managers later when managing the assets. Something also really key here, and also defined within the Capital Works Framework, is the use of IFC. And industry foundation classes is a kind of standardized communication language. It formulates standard information, or the output of information, in a standard way so that it can be shared across stakeholder groups using different types of software. A little note I put here is like, think CSV files for Excel, text-based files that can be imported, exported, and used in other platforms. This is super important because, not from a design perspective, not everybody uses Revit. You know, we have many different softwares that we use for designing, and it's important we're able to share information between them. And then finally, international cost management standards, or construction management standards here, ICMS. This is the cost and carbon classification and reporting structure. And I'm going to highlight the word reporting here, and we'll get into more detail later, as I mentioned. But this is the core requirements around kind of building information management: ISO, Uniclass, IFC, and ICMS. Super important. So looking at ICMS, the impact of ICMS on global practices. And as I'm a cost manager, a quantity surveyor by trade, I find this kind of hugely interesting from our perspective. A couple of reasons behind ICMS, I guess, is ICMS provides a high-level structure and format for classifying, defining, measuring, recording, analysing, and presenting life cycle costs and carbon emissions associated with construction projects and constructed assets. Something important about ICMS, it's just a cost structure. Right now, the OGP have defined this as the reporting tool. It does mean that we have to use maybe traditional cost breakdown structures that are legacy from legacy projects, but ICMS is purely reporting right now. But it's the first time in history we have a global industry-wide standard for cost and carbon. The first time. This means that as cost managers, quantity surveyors, we can now communicate, benchmark using this standard globally, not just nationally. But ICMS is not a method of measurement. It does not replace ARM. It does not replace NRM, New Rules of Measurement from the UK, or ARM, Agreed Rules of Measurement here in Ireland. It's just a reporting standard for cost breakdown structure. We'll get into a little bit more detail on it. So in the past, as we mentioned, we did not have a structure, a global standard. What we had was national standards in different countries. Some countries have no standards when it comes to cost breakdown structures. It's just the industry has evolved into having something. And so we now have this standardized approach, ICMS, which we will report all costs on. It means we can begin to benchmark projects. But something I'm going to emphasize later is that if you're a quantity surveyor or a cost manager working with a practice, I would be kind of suggesting that you should use ICMS as your cost breakdown structure, your bill of quantity structure, so that you have continuity throughout your project life cycle. Talk a little bit more about that later. So what happens in the future here? First of all, we need to standardize our information, ICMS. In the future, we'll need to digitize this. Right now, government are only requiring us to report in ICMS in PDF format, but the future will be to digitize that reporting process and eventually automate a lot of it. And what I mean by automate is automating benchmarking, automate across typologies, etc., etc. So this is the process as we see it developing when it comes to ICMS. Just talking about ICMS and the framework, the third edition, and the third edition includes for carbon now. And on the right hand side here, you'll see an extract from the ICMS document. On the top, you'll see level 1 in white there, projects or sub-projects. So ICMS has not been developed just for a particular project type. It's for all projects. It's generic for all projects, not just buildings, but bridges, pipelines, you name it. So we should be able to use ICMS across all public works, not just buildings. This is super important because often people relate this just to buildings, but it's not. And ICMS is, as I mentioned here on the left, is broken into kind of 4 levels, level 1 to 4. 1 being that project type, 2 being that subcategory, and as you can see here, 2 is broken into 6 main kind of pillars, if you like. A or 1 is the acquisition, C or 2 is construction, and then it goes into renewal, operational, maintenance, and end of life. So we're now have a standard that it's not just for capital investment, CapEx, it's now for whole life costing and whole life carbon, full project life cycle. And under each of these categories, we have then the level 3, which is the next layer of information, or the next layer of that information tree, as we call it. And in particular, that of interest here is that number 2 underneath construction. It's broken into demolition, substructure, superstructure. This won't be unusual for all you quantity surveyors, cost managers out there, because we're working in this way anyhow with the National Building Standards to a certain degree. We're very familiar with this type of structure. But what's new for us, of course, is the renewal, the operation, the maintenance, and the end of life components within this. Then you have a subcategory for level 4. I don't show this here. It's quite a lot of detail, but you'll be able to get that from the ICMS website and download the information. It's like under substructure, level 4 will have foundations, lower ground floor slab, basement construction. Again, we're familiar with this. But something that is important here is that anything that falls below level 4, that's level 5, level 6, level 7, this is associated with the local method of measurement. So in Ireland, it could be ARM, for example. Again, ICMS is not a method of measurement, it's just a structure, the skeleton structure behind which we report on. And so your method of measurements will embed underneath these, whether it is ARM, NRM, SMM, whatever. And as I mentioned, it is whole life cycle now. It is whole life carbon. On the top, you'll see the whole life cycle costs. Left of the dotted line is capital investment. Right of the dotted line is operational investment, CapEx and OpEx. It's the same for carbon. We always talk about cost and carbon as being the same thing. Same structure. You price it in the same way. It is, in our view, the responsibility of the cost manager and QS to be able to do this, but we won't get into that today. So here you can see the structure, the hierarchical kind of components within cost and carbon. Very quick example of an output, something that we have from our cost plans. On the left-hand side, again, you'll familiarize yourself here a little bit with that level 1, number 2 cost, construction cost, a capital costs. And I'm just going to open up the levels here as we go through this cost plan. Next, level 2 is that summary, that demolition, substructure, superstructure, architectural works, as I mentioned in the previous slide. And then we dive into the next layer of that, and we get into that level 3, 4, and 5. As I mentioned before, ICMS goes to level 4. Underneath level 5 is your priceable item, it's your method of measurement, it's whatever kind of standard has been is required contractually. Here you'll get just an example of how we approach ICMS and how we've embedded then kind of method of measurements within this cost plan. Could be NRM1, for example, from the UK, just to give you an example. And then, of course, you'll be able to follow this standard through here, demolitions 2.01, 2.01 on the right-hand side again with the total. And all of this becomes that structure of data and information, same components put in the same place. And the output of ICMS for us will be visual representations of the information, benchmarking, analytics, cost drivers, not just on the project, but across projects as well. And something that we found super valuable for us using ICMS is when we're on kind of major projects, capital projects, campus projects, where you have multi-building type projects, you have 3, 4, 5, 15 buildings. You're able to benchmark across buildings to understand cost drivers, to understand the information from a commercial perspective, and now from a carbon perspective. Hugely valuable when you're reporting upwardly to your client, to get them to understand where we should focus the project on. As you can see on some of these graphs, this grey area is massive here on those pie charts. It's because these particular buildings, their cost driver was the MEP, the services. And so we need to focus our full efforts on that if we're value engineering or risk reduction, et cetera, et cetera. This is the power of the standardized approach now to commercial and carbon. So that was ICMS. It's just a kind of a look into it right now. All of that information is available online. You can Google it. I think we do a bunch of videos as well on this on our YouTube channel, etc. You can dig into that as well if you want. And of course, you can always reach out. But up next, the role of BIM. And we're all familiar with building information modeling and building information management. We have heard this BIM thing for over a decade now. But it's really time to kind of pull the value of BIM that it can bring into projects kind of out of the ground now and really drive on what building information management and modeling is. I put up the same graph. Right now, working on 2D drawings, doing 2D takeoff, it's a manual process. It's laborious. It's administrative in reality. There's very little value in sitting down, having to measure the same foundation 10, 15 times on a project across the entire project lifecycle. Why would we not just work with the engineer to develop that foundation in the model where I'm just processing information? Right now, we are able to standardize. We're able to standardize with BIM using, Uniclass, ISO 19650. We're able to standardize our communication using IFC. We're now able to standardize our cost and carbon using ICMS. This means we now have something to work with. It's super exciting. We go from standardize to digitize. So we're able to digitize design work now in 3D, in Revit, in Rhino, in ArchiCAD, in whatever software they're using. We're able to digitize cost now within our costing tools, whatever they are, Qubit, Costex, whatever. We're able to digitize carbon now within our costing tools. And the next step for us will be automation, but we won't go there in this presentation just yet. As we know, and you might be familiar with the dimensions that are associated with building information modeling. And for us, we kind of flip them on the side because often you'll see them as a horizontal, or even, should I say, a vertical, where it's numerical, and you assume that because it's a 3D, 4D, and 5D that one follows the other, but in reality they don't. And building information modeling now, it includes all stakeholder groups. It's not just the design teams, it's the cost team, it's the scheduling team, it's the risk team, it's the contractors team, the supply chain, everybody. You can see here 7D, facilities management, even sustainability now need to be involved. This is much bigger than just 3D models. So what does that mean for us? It means that we now have we need to have an integrated approach to our projects. It means that architects, landscape, civil engineers, structural engineers, etc. All the stakeholder groups now need to be able to communicate with each other and understand the information the other stakeholder is producing and understand how they get benefit from that information. So we now don't sit on the periphery anymore. It's not their fault that I can't use the information. It's my fault I can't use the information because we're not integrated enough. So integration is going to be key here. This means that how our teams are structured needs to change, and effectively our contracts. But again, we won't get into that here. We'll just talk about BIM for the moment. So BIM is forcing us to integrate. And from a QS and cost manager's perspective, this is where the QS and cost manager and the design team design together. We now need to be able to do this together, because the reality is that me as a cost manager and quantity surveyor, I want to be able to use the design team's information to be able to develop my information. I want to use the 3D model information to develop my cost plans, my bill of quantities. I want to use the benefit of that to be able to streamline and improve the service I give. This will have a knock-on effect in terms of time and quality, for sure. But we need integration, we need communication. But the building information management, we need a clear plan, of course, and this is down to the BIM execution plan or the ICT agreement, and that needs to be managed. And it's not just about 3D, as I mentioned. We now need to look at 4D, 5D, 6D, and 7D, how we integrate that into this BIM execution plan. And we talk a little bit about that in a minute. But I just want to highlight something, the value of BIM from just a commercial perspective. That's cost, quantity surveyor. Right now, QSs review designs, and they sit at the back end of a design gateway, receive a whole bunch of information, drawings, specifications, etc. And then they need to process that to create cost estimates to see, is the design on budget? But this takes a hell of a lot of time, and it's after the fact. So we're reacting to information here. It means that if we find an error, a mistake, something's not clear, we need to go back to the design team with our requests RFI list and say, what's this? Can you update that? And the design team need to update after the fact, after the delivery. What we're now looking at from a BIM perspective is how we gain value. And this means we transfer all of that time into the processing of information during the design stage so that the cost plans are created and the estimates are created along the design process with the architects and engineer. And I don't mean that you're doing estimates every single week. I mean that you're looking at the information being produced by the other stakeholder groups, qualifying it as you go through that design gateways. This is where we see the biggest impact and the biggest value creation in terms of that collaboration, communication, etc. I know it's very cost management, quantity surveyor focused, but it's the same for the other disciplines on the design during the project life cycle. So BIM, ISO, Uniclass, IFC, and as I mentioned, BIM is not just ISO. Uniclass, and again, all of this you'll see links here to the websites and stuff where people can look at what this means. And IFC, this common language, in order for us to communicate. We only communicate in IFC. Within KOSMOS, we don't take native Revit files or Rhino or whatever. It has to be IFC because that's how we communicate outwardly to the supply chain, should be IFC also. So we should be getting very familiar with ISO 19650, Uniclass, IFC. And just so people understand, like, the acronyms would sometimes blow your mind. We use so many of them, and they become complicated. And you can see even from this slide alone, we have half a dozen of them or more. But we just wanted to give here this visualization. Everybody understands what the BIM execution plan is. It's the plan of how we're going to manage information on the project. But there's a whole suite of other documents that are necessary to be developed so that we can get to the BIM execution plan. And this often relates heavily on the client, or relies heavily on the client to create their requirements, like their asset information requirements, that AIR. How many clients have you worked for that understand what their asset information requirement is? And that means, what information do I need that's associated with the components within my asset, like the ventilation system, like a door, like a light, etc. Very important, because it feeds into how we develop the design information and the information developed by the different stakeholders stakeholders along the project lifecycle. Just to keep an eye on my time there, I can see. So we should be having this conversation now with our clients. Have you got an AIR? Have you got a PIR, a project information requirement? EIR, exchange information requirement? What's our strategy for the BIM execution plan? Who develops it? At what stage does it become implemented on the project? All of this becomes important, and it's the type of conversations we'll need, and hopefully the OGP, etc., will be able to guide us in terms of what the government expects. And again, just another visual how the EIR and AIR represent here in the beginning of a project. The asset information requirement is not required until the end. It's in the use that we need this information. But of course, in order to get the information in a structured and qualified way, we need to implement that understanding at the very beginning of the project. Otherwise, we're not guaranteed to get that information at the end. So we need to know where we're going in order to understand where we start from. So keep that in mind when it comes to your projects you're working on and the structure of information and the availability of these standards. And we're now changing a process into this circularity. So we're moving from a linear project into a circular project where we're collecting information and feeding it and analyzing it. It's what BIM is going to do. Another little extract here that you guys will be interested in. Again, you'll be able to get access to this presentation later. Employers' documents, suppliers' documents. Suppliers could be consultants, contractors, supply chain, but employers' documents, they need to produce this. It needs to be available to us on the projects. As you can see here, just some identification. But LOD now becomes important, the level of detail. We should be defining that within our BIM execution plans, our exchange information, etc. Also, the appendix for some of this stuff becomes quite important. You know, how we communicate, the information we expect from the architects and engineers, the information requirements from us as quantity surveyors, cost managers. This is just an appendix extract. Some of this stuff becomes important to be able to talk about early with the design team. What do I expect from you as an architect when we talk about stud partitions? What do I expect from you when we talk about doors? And who has the responsibility to deliver this information? We need to get that on the table. We've developed our own internally because they're not available as standards. So we'll need to be able to develop this with our clients in order to be able to have a clear foundation from which to start our project from. Again, we can help with this, of course. And it's, at the end of the day, it all becomes data management. We now focus on data rather than drawings. I hate when we still talk about drawings on projects. We should be talking about models and information, not drawings. But that's just me. Of course, we still have the legacy, and it'll take us quite some time to transition here, I would say. And now we talk about structure and how we share information, and we now use other stakeholders' information in order to create efficiencies and to deliver our information. So this collaborative environment is changing how we operate, and ICMS is a big part of that from a commercial perspective, as well as, of course, Uniclass, IFC, etc. So the changes and opportunities, or challenges and opportunities, just to close out in the last few minutes here. We now need to understand how the different stakeholder groups work. We need to understand how they produce information, how the architect's structures information is different to how the mechanical electrical engineer structures information. That's important. One is component, the other is systems. We need to be open and transparent and communicate. This is a big shift for us. And it will be the big challenges on projects. The integrated approach, as I mentioned earlier on, and I go back to this slide, we now need to be able to work with all the stakeholders. We need to understand their process. We need to understand how they work so that they understand how we work, so that we can build those qualities in our projects. So changing that mindset is going to be one of our biggest challenges here. And integrating 3D design where, for example, the cost manager and the design team design together. But it could be other stakeholders like the contractor working with the client in a much more collaborative environment in order to deliver this information in the way we need it to be. Currently, we're unorganized, we're unstructured. we work with so many different platforms and deliverables. It's really challenging. And so we need to streamline all of this so that we become more, rather than a linear process in developing our projects around BIM, we need to become more circular. So we need to be able to, as I mentioned earlier on, ICMS for us, we use it across the entire project lifecycle, not just to report, but it's our cost plan structure, our estimate structure, and our BOQ structure. So we need to go from this linear process to a circular mindset, using and reusing information. BIM will also increase our quality because we'll be able to assess change extremely quickly if we get the standards in place and update cost and carbon extremely quickly. This means that we can communicate very quickly to our clients. They can make decisions in much more of a real time, and I'll use that in inverted commas. And this will help us and help companies when benchmarking and analysing. So ICMS and carbon means that if we're using ICMS at project level in that standard way, we can then benchmark projects. But it also means that we can feed up into portfolio level and benchmark portfolio. And obviously that all feeds up into the public works. So this entire standardization will allow us to be able to benchmark much more accurately. And we'll remove the need for having to go and do investigations later for why projects have gone over budget. We should have access to that information straight away. So improved experiences. By doing this more collaboratively and using these standards, we'll have better relationships with our other stakeholders, better experiences on the projects, and that will give us better results. We'll improve the industry dramatically, and that's what we need to be able to do here. And that's what the government are trying to do with these standards. Top 5 challenges, I would say, is the capability and understanding across the stakeholder group. I don't think we're there yet in upskilling. Integration and collaboration, it's a big challenge in our industry, I would say. Standardized breakdown and reporting. Do we just report in ICMS or do we use ICMS across the entire project? Transparency. I want to share my information with you because I want you to share your information with me. That's something new. Imagine quantity surveyors sharing all their cost plans with all the stakeholder groups. Well, wow, that's something different. And the mindset. BIM has a bad rep over the last 10 years and needs to change. But the opportunities, increased efficiency, increased quality, increased analytical possibilities, closer collaboration means better relationships and increased prospects of automation in the future. We have a possibility here to solve this labor shortage when it comes to staffing within our organizations. So again, it becomes important to us. But that's it for me. A little bit over time, apologies for that. Thank you very much for listening. I'm available for questions now, of course. And if you want to connect, just take out your phone there, scan the QR codes, connect with contacts or LinkedIn. More than happy to chat with people. Love talking about this type of stuff. But thank you very much, everybody, and have a wonderful afternoon.